So, hello everyone. My name is Ben Shabat. I'm from Israel and working for Automotive Technologies. Whoever might not know what is Automotive Technology, so it's actually a company that gives cybersecurity solution for the entire vehicle, for the entire life cycle for vehicle. And yeah, and I'm actually working for Automotive at the Department of Service and Product for CARIAD system, which is vulnerability management product. And it's all about the topic that we are gonna talk today. And I'm really excited to have today Anupam and Kaivan. If you want to present yourself, Anupam.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Eden. Hi, everyone. Great to see you in this call. My name is Anupam Chomal. I am the vulnerability management lead at CARIAD. CARIAD is a Volkswagen company, and we look into the ECU and backend development for Volkswagen family, which includes Audi, Porsche, and the rest of the brands. Uh, Overall, I have around 23 years of experience in the industry. I have worked in areas like kernel side development, firewall development. I've been on the networking side. So basically, my entire experience is on the security side. And today I come into the event as also someone who has worked with CARALERT tool for last couple of years, 3 years now. So I want to share some of the experience in that area also. So with that, probably I'll hand over to you, Kaivan.
Sure. My name is Kaivan Karimi. I'm with Microsoft. I work for manufacturing and mobility industry solutions, and one of the two hats that I wear is the OT security practice SME from the Office of CTO for us. My background is 12 years in telecom, including working on secure processors for the agencies, as well as 18 years in automotive, transportation, and industrial, um, work in functional safety, work in cybersecurity, and generally in the new movement on software-defined vehicles and the infrastructure and technologies that are needed to go in place, both from a functionality as well as functional safety and cybersecurity perspective. It's great to meet you all.
Great, thank you. And it's really, really good to have you today. And I just want to explain for a second how it's going to work. So we've collected some interesting questions for today, and we're gonna ask each one of you the question. And about like 10 minutes at the end of the session, we would actually, I'm talking here for the audience, you can actually, during the session, write your questions and rate it in the side of the barrier, and we would see it during the session, and in the end we will choose a few questions to ask Anupam and Kaivan. So please feel free to ask your question during the session, and in the end we'll present some of them. So yeah, I think we can start. So our first question that we have is actually to you, Anupam, and it's, I think, the main like thing that we're talking about, like how would you define a vulnerability? What is vulnerability for you?
No, yeah, that's easy and a tough one at the same time. Um, I'll just read out the textbook definition of what NIST says. Vulnerability says is a flaw or weakness in a computer system and blah blah blah, which could be used to exploit or violate the security of a system. So vulnerability is basically something by which an attacker can attack a system. It can be within the car, it can be within the cloud backend, it can be uh, 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 in the entire ecosystem where the software is developed. Two examples which I give of vulnerabilities that will probably join the dots is the Log4j, right? Log4j was everywhere. It was there in the ECUs inside the car. It was in the cloud backend. It was in the IT infrastructure. And a earlier one, which was there even before that, Heartbleed, right, in OpenSSL. So again, there are different ways in which vulnerabilities can be classified. There are different ways in which the severity can be assessed. But in a nutshell, it is something that can be used to exploit a system, and it can be or cannot be publicly known. There are vulnerabilities which folks are aware of, but they don't release that information so that they can use it for their personal gains or beyond that.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And the next question that we have, it's also for you, Anupam. So if we talk about what is vulnerability, what are the differences between vulnerability management for automotive and for the IT networks? You actually mentioned Log4Shell, that's how it
Yes.
can like impact each other. And I think we know this case really close to us, but like how you do differentiate between the both of them.
Yeah, that's a good one actually. I have luckily been on both sides. I have been on the network side, and now I'm on the automotive side for last 4 years. So I can differentiate that. Basically, the core definition of vulnerability will remain the same, something by which you can exploit the system. Now, the modern cars that we have are all having the computers inside, which are called ECUs, and these computers have lots of open source or proprietary software, right? So they would have similar kind of vulnerabilities that are there in the IT system, but then there are other challenges in, say, vulnerabilities in the automotive ecosystem as compared to an IT ecosystem. So on the automotive side, the vulnerability management is a bit lengthier affair because, like for example, something like an application that you're developing, a web application or an application that is sitting on the desktop, we can update the software pretty easily. We can do the testing very fast, right? We can release the fix in the next hot fix or the fix in the next sprint or whatever you have, and you are done with that. In the automotive side, when you do, when you have a vulnerability, you have to have risk analysis in the way the automotive industry accepts it. For example, here in Europe, you have something called TARA. Yeah, it is it's not it's a general concept, actually not Europe specific, but I think it came out of ISO 21434, and TARA is the way by which you do risk analysis. So you have to use TARA to do risk analysis of all the vulnerabilities that are coming out of your vulnerability management process, and the fix may not happen in your normal 30, 60, 90 time frame that you have on the IT side. So IT side, this is this industry kind of defined that you would fix criticals in 30, and then highs and mediums and lows in 30, 60, 90. That kind doesn't work on the automotive side. So the automotive side has a lengthier vulnerability management process where you detect the vulnerabilities. That itself is pretty involved. Then after that is the challenge about doing the assessment and then the fixing. You may have multiple layered, you have multiple OEMs, you may have vulnerability in hardware. I won't name one of the big sub car suppliers, but they have a vulnerability in the hardware which cannot be fixed. And researchers go in conferences and they show exploits for that particular hardware vulnerability, right? So again, it's not that straightforward. In a way, it's similar, but it's a lengthier affair. Kaivan, do you want to add something on top of it?
Yes, so it's actually another thing you mentioned, Terra. Input to Terra is HERA, hazard analysis from a functional safety, and that notion doesn't exist in IT. The other part of it is how large the attack surfaces and the interdependencies. You're talking about, let me go back to an older model. Right now, it's the code base is exploding, but it's model year 2019 for F-150 was 150 million lines of codes, coming from hundreds. It's actually thousands of, literally from a supplier perspective, hundreds of suppliers all around the world and coming in binary format. In IT, it's significantly simpler, significantly simpler.
Yes, thank you. And I just want to add one more point on it. That IT vulnerability management is baked in, been done that for what, decades now? That is not the same with the automotive vulnerability management side. Automotive moving on to software is a very recent thing that is happening. I mean, the full-fledged autonomous vehicles and car software and stuff, right? So the car industry will take a bit of time to get this thing working. They can learn from the IT side, but it's a long way to go.
Yeah, so I think, Kevin, the next question is for you, but it's also related to just the answer that you gave with Tara and all of the things. So in your opinion and your experience, why you think automated vulnerability management system and automated one is really mandatory in today's cybersecurity landscape? Not even, only regulation kind of things, but from your experience.
So it's we have a unique perch at Microsoft. We because of the broad footprint on the digital state from everybody uses Windows Office and Gamebox and etc. etc. We receive 78 trillion signals per day. 78 trillion with a T. So pretty much everything that happens around the world we witness. And one of the fastest growing area is actually the weaponization of Gen AI that is happening, which makes average hackers to go two notch up to be as effective as cyber criminals. And so it's not just an automated vulnerability management system that's mandatory. Forget about just as you said, the regulations. But really, you need an automated vulnerability management with a very strong threat intelligence operating at machine speed, because the tools that cyber criminals are using now has gone significantly more sophisticated. The number of cyber criminals has gone higher, significantly higher. We used to up to last year, Microsoft, we were following about 300 plus unique threat actors. This year, it's about 1,500 of them. So it's getting a lot worse, and manufacturing and critical infrastructure were number one in the pecking order of all the segments that they're being hacked. With more and more cars becoming connected, it puts them right up there as targets for the cyber criminals to go after. So the only way you can protect a car is if you have an automated system in place.
Yeah, I agree with you. Sorry, Anupam. Yeah.
No problem. I just wanted to add that my point is not as big as Kaivan's, the number of inputs that you are getting, but in the automotive side as a OEM, the challenge that we face is we get lots of code from lots of different suppliers, and we have multiple ECUs in the car, and on those ECUs are multiple partitions on which there are stuff coming from multiple suppliers. Uh, Add on top of that the cloud backend and then the infrastructure. If you're hit by something like a log4j and you want to find out which all of your components are affected, regulations is one side that you have to, now you have UNEC and China GBT, where you have to continuously track your software and your components. But for security purpose, if you want to track all of these moving parts, all of these suppliers, ECUs, it is really tough to do it manually. In an IT environment, again, the same. And I jumped in because the question that Eden you asked about IT versus automotive. In the IT environment, you have your assets, you know your assets, you're tracking your assets. Here, you have your ECUs, you have your software in it. You don't know how many levels of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers have come in with their code. And then to track some vulnerability against all of them, you can't do it manually anymore. You have to have an automated system.
Yeah, and I think also the main part that sometimes we might forget is that even not the amount of data, but actually that we are facing here with safety of people sometimes. So we have to do it at least as much as more fast and automatic that we can. And actually it's related also to the other question, which is for both of you. So yeah, of course it's automated, but I think that you both agree with me, especially when we talk about automotive, this thing, not the products can be automatic, but you still have people from whether it's OEMs or tier ones that actually on those products, they will give they give the service, see what's going on and actually act, and not everything is automatic. So how do you feel, how often should vulnerability assessment be performed? How often you should look on the system, do some actions and things around that? Yeah,
I,
Anupam, you can.
I can go.
Mhm.
I worked for BlackBerry for 5 years. They on the automotive and industrial side, and while I was there, while I wasn't a part of the handset group, but um, in those years, BlackBerry was trying to get out of the handset business for many years, and they couldn't because of the security agencies not allowing them yet. And one of the reasons was it was the only platform in the world that had never ever been hacked, and it's still, from what I understand, true to date. Um, uh, for the lifetime of while they were in business on the handset side, they had never been hacked, and it was a combination of many things that went into it. But one of the bigger ones was they did in-field health check on regular basis, analogous to you and I go to the doctor to check our, whatever that is on regular basis. They did that on regular basis on the handsets that they managed. Now you look at the complexity of the handset, complexity of the car. My assumption is you need to do it significantly more often and do it across the board, whether it's the apps, which lots of vulnerabilities come from there, whether it's that, the managing the posture of that 150 million plus lines of codes and what is happening inside of it, different parts of partitions of those codes. And yeah, they're a piece of code that maybe it was a CVE of level 3 could become a 5 or 6 in conjunction with another piece of code because you just made an update. And so on regular basis, as you're going through that posture management, my assumption is you need to do it sooner than later. I don't know what is practical at the moment. Industry is going through its learning curve. I'll leave that to Anupam to answer from an OEM perspective. But um, more often is we should err on more often than not. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
Anupam?
thank you. I just want to, like you said, Kaivan, I want to add the automotive take on it. And my take on this is that, again, this ties into your earlier question, Eden. Why do we need to automate this scanning, vulnerability management scanning process? Because there are so many assets, because there are so many issues, software you need to automate. And when you automate, automation gives you the power to scan it regularly, continuously. And I really mean continuous scanning. And I tell you why. I'll give an example. If there is a car manufacturer, say X, and that car manufacturer has 10,000 cars on the road, just as a very small example. Now imagine that those 10,000 cars are affected all by, again, that same example, log for J. If you know it today, you have some time before the hackers, maybe some time before they start attacking your systems, your cars, right? But if you come to know about it after a week or after 2 weeks, right, then you have lost the initial advantage that you could have worked on the fix and pushed to your cars. And this is just about the car, but this can apply to your backend, to your IT infrastructure. Automation helps you there, because if you have an automated system, and there are different ways in which you can do this testing. You can do it on the source code. There is there's the list of software that you have that can be scanned, but there are different ways in which you can do the scanning. But the ideal scenario would be that you do it regularly. Now it would depend on the kind of tool that you have. For example, the tool that we use lets us scan it every day. So we have the next morning when we come back to office, we have a new set of results that against your software, these are the vulnerabilities which are found. So I would say as frequently as possible, because it gives your team a heads up, an advantage in terms of giving more time to fix the vulnerabilities.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think so. Our next question is actually get a little bit more in depth on this topic. It's also for both of you. Anupam, you can start. And what is build of materials actually, and how do you assemble it or receive it?
No, okay. Yes. So, sorry, but I'll give a long answer on this one. Um, uh, yes, but I want to make this clear. This ties into my previous answer, actually. So, I said that there are different ways in which you can do scanning. So, you can do source code level scanning, you can do binary scanning, but then there is something called the bill of material, like you said, Eden. So, bill of material is basically the laundry list, the list of software that is going into a final product. So, you may have an infotainment ECU in the car, And that infotainment ECU might have multiple partitions with maybe Linux and some other Android or whatever running on it. And within there are many packages installed. So that list of packages is what is called the bill of material typically. Bill of material is also different types. There is the software bill of material, there's the hardware bill of material. So there's the SBOM, HBOM. There is also a CBOM now, which is cryptographic bill of material. But basically, the bill of material is a list of software that is going into your product. This bill of material is for the automotive side. I'm speaking mostly about the automotive side. The best way to track vulnerabilities in your software, because you may have different kind of contracts with your suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, but you can definitely put it in your contract that the supplier will provide a list of software or the software bill of material for everything that the supplier is handing over to you. This bill of material can be used by automated vulnerability management systems to find and track vulnerabilities in your system, right? So, Kaivan, do you want to add to
Yeah,
this?
so I've had good amount of experience on the SBOM side of it, and one of the things that I think a lot of my colleagues will find offensive is I'm very negative on open source. It's a when you go through SBOM analysis, you realize you actually capture and look at your open source as a source of vulnerability, whether at the moment it is or not, but it's a you capture it as a vulnerability from a risk profile perspective, assign from a posture management of the whole code base, you assign a number to it, and on regular basis you need to revisit it. Um, just as Anupam said, the posture of that code base is what needs to get managed on a regular basis. I'm biased towards the binary code that gets it's because that's the code that gets shipped. When you develop part of the code yourself, such as Anupam's teams does, yes, the source code is also important. But when you look at what comes from the supply chain, a lot of it in binary format, not a lot of documentation on that, and that's probably one of the biggest issues in the automotive industry. That lineage of the code base coming from the supply chain and then the feedback loop back to the supply chain. Very tricky and no standards necessarily to follow. It's a that code base is probably the biggest thing. You develop a cyber digital twin of the car when you in a formal SOC, but part of it is right next to it is your code base that you do need to scan it on a regular basis. You do need to make sure that posture is still the score from a scoring system. It's at the level that you can live with, or you need to go and make changes. And again, more often than not, the source of vulnerability that, by the way, also impacts the safety side of the things comes from open source.
Yeah, I think there are many like aspects of it. Like if we talk regarding build of materials, so I think now like those recent few years, or even not few years, maybe the last year, it's much more known and spoken with also like the tier ones and the suppliers on how to deliver it and how to actually document it. But I think for ECUs or vehicles that was like just a previous years ago, it's much more challenging how to actually extract all this software and bill of materials, and it's much more difficult to really do accurate risk and vulnerability management and understand what actually is inside your vehicle. And it's actually, Kaivan, related to the next question for you. Maybe you have, because we talked right now about one of the most challenging thing, which is the build of materials. But if you have another challenging thing about performing vulnerability management in the automotive industry besides the build of materials.
One other thing I want to mention from the last question is importance of API and API testing and API risk mitigation. It's been one of the things that entry points for a lot of bad actors, and that's, by the way, common on IT and OT, but especially in OT. Um, that needs to be considered as a part of the DevSecOps process, but also on an ongoing basis. They challenge in automotive industry from a vulnerability management is it's things that we actually talked about. Most of it, it's the complex supply chain, thousands of suppliers across multiple tiers providing these software. The volume of the code, that 150 million plus lines of code. By the way, I know of um, uh, mid-tier, high-end cars now that they're pushing over 200 million lines of code. So it's getting more complex. Product life cycle. It's a, when you're talking about IT, when you're talking about consumer, these products are, 18 months to 3 years, 4 years pushing it. But it gets replaced. And so as new wholesale replacement takes place, a lot of the vulnerabilities gets addressed, especially if it's hardware based. And cars are going to be on the road for 15 to 20 years. So it takes a long time. And then because these are mission critical applications, when something goes wrong with a car, really bad things can happen. And human lives depend on it. And so, as a mission critical application, again, you have to be significantly more sensitive to the operation of these devices. Um, One of the things that Anupam said at the beginning is, people have been dealing with the culture of security in the networking space for a long time, 30, 40 years. And so today, when you open up a newspaper or front page of any of your websites, you see a lot of attacks on IT systems. It's not like IT defenders wake up every day and say, "Hey, I'm going to do a bad job today, so I'm going to be on the headline." No, they're doing the best they can with the learning curve under their belt for the last 35, 40 years. But attacks are getting more sophisticated. More attackers are coming in because this is a very profitable business. In automotive, the culture of security is not there yet. This is a new thing to them. Cars haven't been connected. Security for cars usually has been relegated to, okay, things that are proximity related, things that are related to cracking the door or remote entry. Now you're talking about a network device that can be accessible, very sophisticated network device that can be accessed from anywhere in the world. And that is a huge challenge. So it is the most complex, the largest attack surface that can become, frankly, a weapon of mass destruction, and it's readily available everywhere. That's the challenge.
And Kaivan has beautifully summarized this. I just wanted to add two things on top of that. Like Kaivan, you again brought the IT part comparison thing here. IT, it's pretty straightforward that you have a CI/CD pipeline, you have a source code, you can do IT checks and stuff, or you have your infrastructure, you have your scanners running on the infrastructure, and it is done. The software that you or the assets that you have on the automotive side, you might get some source code, you might get some binaries, you might get some HBOMs. So you have to be prepared to be handling all of these cases. In the ideal world, you will have everything in the same format, but here formats could be different. And the other biggest one big challenge which I see is the delivery of your fix. So on the IT side, the fix can be, you have the patch, people download and it's applied. How do you deliver to the cars which are on the field, right? Some car might be sitting in a garage and it'll wake up after 2 weeks, and then suddenly, you have to push the fix in. It would be driving. How do you provide the fix while it is driving? When do you apply the patch? How do you take the customer's approval before applying the patch? So that's the another challenging part on the automotive side about applying the fixes to the cars.
And that's the play. That's the importance of the playbook inside of the car. That in IT, you'll have a set of rules, but in automotive is significantly more important. When you come across something, you tell the driver, "Hey, pull to the side of the road and just tow your car because it's so dangerous? Obviously not, but it's a that I need to patch it right away, or do you want to take it to the dealer, or what are those scenarios? How do you come up with that? And that's, by the way, there is no standards for those either. It's unique to every OEM and every car.
Anupam, so I feel every time before I ask some questions that you already like discussed it, because it's like you build up this in your discussion. But right now we're going to talk a little bit about HBOM, and you mentioned CBOM, SBOM, HBOM. HBOM, for those who don't know, are hardware bill of materials, which is pretty like a little bit different from the known SBOM that we just talked about. But how do OEMs, and you are from like an OEM perspective, typically gather and maintain the information required for an HBOM and hardware bill of materials? Are there any tools that are effective?
I can say this from an OEM perspective. Having an updated hardware bill of material is really critical. You have multiple chipsets and stuff going into your ECUs, and then there are these known vulnerabilities against the chipset. I see reports coming in from independent researchers where they actually open up the entire ECU and they go at that level. So they would invest money just to find some vulnerability and exploit it. They can get it to conferences, or if they really want, they might use it in the back end to do something really nefarious. So having a hardware bill of material inventory is really important. I From an OEM side, I don't know of a tool that can scan the hardware and come up with a hardware bill of material. The best bet today is that we have a suppliers providing us that information, but then it's not only about the hardware but also the firmware that goes with it. So that information today, the best way to do it is get from the suppliers, and the tool that you use for your scanning, right? That's a very critical choice that you make, because that tool should also be able to support hardware bill of material, right? And maybe C bombs in future. But the majority of the tools which I see out there in the market today are very good at SBOM scanning. I really see them hardly talk about HBOM scanning. But HBOM is, if not more, at least at the same level as the SBOM for me. So I don't know of a tool that can scan and extract the HBOM. We have SBOM scan generation tools available, right? Like we have Marvin that can look at a Java source code and give you the SBOM, or Trivi that generates an SBOM. I don't know of a hardware tool that can generate that. The best bet is getting from the suppliers and to invest in tools that can not only scan SBOMs but also HBOMs for you. Kaivan, do you want to add something on that?
There's actually we have a partner that, from an HBOM analysis perspective, that carries the entire HBOM from. They're a partner of us as a part of the SDV, where you went during the design and development, and you can actually give you an inventory of all the parts that are available in the market and the variations to them and availability of them globally. That then carries itself through all the way to the the build of the car and the digital twin of the car for the operation of it from a SOC level perspective. But one thing that I wanted to mention that you brought up, and that was the CBOM. And when you look at level 4 and up, you're supposed to have 2,000 plus credentials and certs that you need to manage. And if you look at really the notion of identity and what you're managing during the operation of the car, it's not just people, right? Identity in an IT system is people and devices. When you go to the factory, it becomes machines, and for every notionally, you say for every one person, you got 40 machines. When you go to processes, say a multi-core processor managing from an IT system, from an OT system, notionally, again, nominally, you say it's about 350 processes per machine. In cars, now when you come across all these, because cars are moving, come across many different access points and many different types of vulnerabilities, you look at it from on per process session based authentication, very sophisticated. So an SCMS system that manages all of that cert, and indeed brings the notion of privileged access management on per process basis for the cars becomes a key. And so that's the other part of the equation that we need to consider, that goes along hand in hands with HBOM and SBOM. And that's for the operation of the car now, and from a from a VSOC aspect of it.
So yeah, the next question also regarding to it, Anupam, is also for you. How often should an HBOM be updated to ensure it remains accurate and relevant? What actually triggers an update? Like if there is a new component, firmware update, some vulnerability discovery.
Sure. Again, Kaivan, maybe you can add on top of it of whether some tools are available or some processes. I'll speak from the OEM's perspective on this, and it very much so from my perspective, the ECUs are locked for me. There will be very big level changes in the hardware, not very often. However, the vulnerabilities will keep coming for that hardware that you have. You will have firmware updates which will come in for your hardware. You may be adding some new hardware in your list, right? So vulnerabilities will keep coming up for the software that you have. Vulnerabilities will keep coming up for the hardware that you have, existing hardware, the chipsets that you have. So again, just like you scan the SBOMs, you have to keep scanning the HBOMs as well. In fact, I would go one level higher and say that HBOM scanning for me is on a higher priority, because it's difficult to fix hardware vulnerabilities than software vulnerabilities. So I would rather want to know what is a known vulnerability in my hardware first, then I track the software one. So yes, if there is a new component added, it has to be added to your database. And again, ties into your previous question. Every organization would typically have an asset database. They would have a software asset database and hopefully a hardware asset database, right? So your cars should be modeled in this databases such that for this car, these are the ECUs that I have. Within this ECU, these are the chipsets which I have. So whenever there's an addition to your HBOM, some new chipset or new chip or whatever ECU, that should trigger an update scan. Also, if there are firmware changes, because firmware changes keep coming in, all of these chipset suppliers are regularly on their sites publishing vulnerabilities. So you have to be you have to be tracking this. Ideally, your tool should know your chipset, and then go to these manufacturers' site and pull in updates that they share. Many chipset like manufacturers like Qualcomm and others, they keep sharing vulnerability information. So you have to be on top of that. That should trigger another. Rather than, I would say, trigger point, I would say HBOMs should be scanned regularly whenever there is a change in your HBOM, or on your nightly basis or whatever. But Kaivan, you want to add on that?
No, it's a so I actually when I look at the HBOM, there are two sides to it. One is not every ECU or domain controller or processor is software upgradable today. If you look at platforms, if it was a greenfield, EVs are, but there is a transition that's happening in the industry, and there are many ECUs that are not accessible unless you take them to the shop. For the ones that are accessible, the challenge is, the actual, if the vulnerability is associated with something in the actual hardware, you can't necessarily OTA a piece of fixed hardware, and that's the challenge. So you go through, how do I mitigate risk via software patches to bypass the exposure that I have until the next the next release of the chip, and who knows if it's going to get used in the next platform by the car company or not. But that's a tricky thing. Hardware HBOM risk mitigation is a very tricky thing.
Yes. And just one more point I'll add on top of that is, as a OEM, I would want, and as someone who leads a vulnerability management team, I would want to know my vulnerabilities. Even if I'm not able to fix it, my management can take a decision whether we have to do some kind of recall or whatever. but I can tell my management what is a risk that my hardware has, right? That capability comes from being able to scan my HBOMs regularly.
The next question is actually for both of you. How do you prioritize your vulnerabilities? And think about, like, I know how I prioritize the vulnerabilities. If it's based, I'm interested to hear if it's based CVSS code, whether it's for an H1 vulnerability or S1 vulnerability, if it's CVSS based exploits, some attack that it's already known. How do you actually decide? Because we talked about automation and automatic products, but still you have a lot of information. How do you actually decide what is the most prioritized vulnerabilities or even exploits that that you want to act on that? Anupam, you can start.
Kaivan, sorry, you want to go ahead or?
Sure. Yeah. So so when you develop a car, during the design and development perspective, you do all this analysis from HERO analysis and TERO analysis, and you do all this pen testing and fuzz testing, and you do everything that you can and you come up with a posture and different parts of the overall posture and the score that you have. The risk score is a function of all the building blocks for that code base and for that architecture. And so you do all of that during the design and development cycle. You make sure that it's secure by design and by default. But really, that whole information then gets transferred. That whole DevSecOps information and the posture of hardware and software becomes the basis for the cyber digital twin of the car in a SOC. You need to have a formal VSOC that, again, at machine speeds, it's not only receiving all that 78 trillion signals per day, which includes a lot of the ecosystem from an automotive and manufacturing perspective, but also threat intelligence, everything that comes from Auto ISAC, everything that comes from automotive forums, everything that you scrape from the dark web. All of that threat intelligence needs to come together. What determines the priority of what you need to patch is fundamentally related to when you bring all of that information together, and you combine it with all of the logs and everything in your security data lake. And when you combine all of that, what happens to the posture of the car? What things that used to be a CVE level 2 or 3 all of a sudden pop up to be an 8? And what did you receive yesterday or today from that threat intelligence that you immediately need to fix? It's contextual, but lots of inputs going into it. Your baseline is that cyber digital twin of the car that you're managing at your VSOC. But really, how you decide what to do next is a function of all these different inputs that comes together that says, this is the thing that I need to fix first. Because while I could live with it yesterday, now I can't, or it's something completely brand new, something that happened yesterday. Hey, what happened yesterday in Eastern China applies exactly to the entity or the piece of code or anything that is that I'm trying to that I'm protecting, and it looks very similar. How do I go and proactively patch it up? You need to again, needs to be automated, like to Anupam's point at the beginning, and it needs to be automated at the machine speed. It really, that's where automation from a VSOC perspective, and the challenge is you need to do it for the 15 to 20 years on the road. You think about how many different types of threats and threat actors have come up in just the last 2 or 3 years, and at that rate, it's astronomically going up, and you need to be responsive to it.
So I just want to add something on top of Kaivan has beautifully summarized it. And as someone who is part of the one who leads the vulnerability management team, I would say I need a starting point. So I would take the CVSS score as my starting point. But what Kaivan said is you do a lot of posture or analysis at the start of the development process. So you should be able to identify which ECUs are critical for you, which functions are critical for you, and ideally, and another thing which you mentioned, Kevin, is that this has to be automated because of the volume involved. So you should have a posture, and then you should have automation that the tool should support. That for a particular ECU, it has knowledge, right, which is critical, right, and whether it's kind of embedded, whether this ECU actually has a Bluetooth interface when it's showing a Bluetooth vulnerability, right? There might be some Bluetooth package involved, but it might not have an interface at all, which might not be exploitable. So all that information, if the tool is able to accept, then the tool should ideally be able to give you its own rating for that particular vulnerability. This is critical because for any team, and I'm sure automotive folks would know there are hundreds of teams involved in a single car. So all of these teams getting 100 or 200 vulnerabilities, 100 is a very low number, I'm saying. But per team, if they receive 100, 200 vulnerabilities, for them to prioritize these vulnerabilities was going to be a really tough one. As a starting point, you always look at the CVSS score. But if the tool can support you in helping you understand which of those CVs are really important for you, it'll really help. And then what Kaivan said ties in that you might have that initial security understanding of ECU or the backend components. That should give you an algorithm that decides whether a particular set of CVs will really be critical for you or not. So the actual CVSS score is a starting point, and then your whole algorithm that tells you how to treat these CVs. So a second set of score that tells you, hey, although this is as critical, but depending on your security posture and your automation, this is actually a low or a medium, whatever. This is how you should ideally prioritize vulnerabilities.
And one of the driving things over there is always is related to the safety function. It's if it's a if the security vulnerability introduce a safety issue, especially and you delineate your ASILs B, C, D. If it's a D, it's like front and center. You're looking at it. It's a safety function that controls the operation of the car. You need to make sure that it's in pristine level, and you assign a different risk mitigation factor to those versus things that are apps related and inside of the cockpit. So, but absolutely on regular basis, you look at it and you try to preserve the operation of the car, and specifically when it comes uh, to the safety of the occupants.
Yeah, so we have, sorry to interrupt you, we have about 2 minutes, and I want us to answer to some question that came from one of the people in the audience. So if you can like shortly answer to this question, in certain situations, software development environment might be really diverse in terms of used languages, number of stakeholders involved, remoteness of location. What strategy would you recommend to tackle with such a situation? I think we talked about it a little bit. But...
Yes. I can maybe just quickly start and give my thoughts on this in a minute, and then Kaivan, maybe you can please
Sure.
add to it. Yeah. So from my perspective, some standardization is needed, and right automation and tools are needed. When you have multiple software development environments and teams and languages, at least the SDLC can be common across them, the secure development lifecycle. So you have to insist on a secure development lifecycle. You have to be able to assess the artifacts which are generated by the secure development lifecycle. So no matter what tool or language they use, they have to come back to you and say, yes, this is a secure development lifecycle we have implemented. Here are the artifacts to support our claim, right? One of the artifacts out of that can be the HBOM that again can go into an automated tool. And then probably you have a vulnerability database that can pick up these artifacts and do a kind of correlation across them and tell you the correct picture of that, application or issue that they are developing. But in a nutshell, you have to do that standardization by asking your suppliers to prove that they have done a secure development lifecycle and provide you artifacts for the same. Again, like SBOMs we discussed, there are formats of SBOMs like Cyclone DX, SPDX. Somebody would insist they'll give in a JSON, somebody say SPDX, Cyclone DX. You have to decide for yourself what format and what fields you would want. Otherwise, you are sitting on chaos. Every supplier giving you a different format, different fields, and then you have to keep going back to them and talking to them. But Kaivan, yeah.
So I would approach it as just look at what gets shipped. It's in binary format. It's the compile code. It's what gets shipped at the end of the day, not the source code. Everything that Anupam said, from the standardizing on the formats and the as much of the development environment as you can, but you need a binary decomposition tool that goes and scans the binary code and delineates and finds the open source versus known vulnerabilities versus et cetera, et cetera. And it also includes the effects of the compilers. It's there are a lot of times that in source code, with good intentions, the developer is, it's trying to implement an ASLR scheme to distribute the information address. And they do turn on pick and pie compiler flags. The impacts of compiler flags shows up somewhere between 30 to 40% of the time on a regular basis, that the right ones were not used. And so I would start with the end product that gets shipped, decompose it, assign a posture to it, and then start managing it from there forward. And there are tools, by the way, out there, multiple vendors that are offering similar tools. The ones that speak automotive, I would err on that side. The ones that actually look at, have a notion of adaptive AutoSAR and have a notion of the coding schemes that needs to get used, and has a notion of posture management, which changes that you need to make. Multiple tools out there.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And actually, this in the end of the session, we had a lot more questions, but your discussion was super interesting. And I think for each question we could talk for at least 1 hour. So it was really great to have you today. Really great. And that's it from my side. And if you have some last things it's important to you to say regarding the topic today, feel free.
Yeah. So thank you, Eden, for inviting here. Thank you, Kaivan, for giving your wonderful insights on the topic. I would just want to add, as someone who is in this side of things, on the automated vulnerability management side, picking the right tool and having the right kind of processes in place is really important. You may get a tool and then you need to realize that it is not doing everything that you want, and then you have to then go back and ask for more tools from your organization. Or you may have a tool but you don't have the policies and processes in place to get input for the tool, right? So this is a joint thing. Think about what you want to do, what kind of processes would be needed, and what kind of tools can support this. Try to go for a tool that can automate things and covers a bigger spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things like getting supporting different kind of SBOMs, different uploading mechanisms, gives you an algorithm for your own CV rating and stuff, and that will help you in reducing your workload to a big extent. Yeah, Kaivan. Yeah.
Thanks, Anupam. Sage advice, considering that you're right in the middle of it. You're the responsible person. I'm looking at it from, I look at the IT industry today, and it's suffering because of the fragmentation of the tools that get used. And it's 40 some percent of all the vulnerabilities are actually associated with people who think, a category leader, I'm going to bring in these tools, separate tools, and stitch them together myself. Regardless of what you use, whose tool sets you use, broad as possible, to Anupam's point, but also look at an end-to-end system. The XDR and the SOC need to get integrated. The DevSecOps environment needs to be integrated. You need to look at an end-to-end system above and beyond. I have the best in class in one widget and I have best in class in another widget. And then to Anupam's point again, as broad as possible, and go through a formal system development. This isn't something that you can haphazard stitch together. Again, mission critical applications, people's lives depend on it. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. I'll just say that from our perspective, it's also the people. We build a strong teams for people that you trust, work with people that you can count on. And really thank you for today, and have just rest wonderful week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.